Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing, with your hosts, Mercedes Paulmeyer and Katja Dev. What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode. I'm Mercedes Paulmeyer, and this is the second episode for RPE and auto-regulation. And last week, I'm sorry I didn't publish an episode. I was actually sick. I did not dodge that bullet, but I am feeling pretty good. I feel grateful that my sickness was really only a week long, so I'm feeling pretty good today. So we're going to dive in, and really today's episode is all about whether if you're trying hard enough, do you know that you're trying hard enough in your sessions? What is too much try hard? I think climbing is a little bit more complex to understand where the intensity is. So I hope in today's episode we can kind of go over some of the signs of whether you're trying hard enough or not nearly enough. Okay. So if you haven't listened to part one yet, you should, because it really goes over what auto-regulation is, what RPE is, and we also went over some other tools, which is reps in reserve, like what that is specifically to lifting. And I cover lifting first because it's easier to understand and manage and measure. You know exactly how much weight you're lifting in that day, you know what you've done in the past, and you kind of know what to expect in the next session. And you can adjust your weights based on how you feel. And we are showing up different every day. Your cells turn over every minute, every hour. Your whole body, I think, is renewed within 30 days. And so you are going to show up differently. And it's kind of irrational to think that you can show up every day and try just as hard every training session, because that's just not possible. Your body experiences stress and different types of stress, and that is really going to affect how you feel and how much energy you have to give to that session. And the best way to know if you're really truly putting your best effort forward is to really feel what RPE is in your body, what auto-regulation is. And when it comes to climbing, I think it is a lot more complex than strength because, it depends on the terrain that you're climbing, the hold types, your movement efficiency, and even that mental script that you might be telling yourself when you're on an overhanging lead. There's going to be some fear that sets in, and that also changes how much effort you put into your sessions. So all of these things come into play. So for example, I think everyone can relate to this, where there's two climbs that are exactly the same grade, but they're going to be so different depending on the holds, the size of the holds, the angle, the movement style. All right. And another example of how intensity can really change is you can see this on an adjustable training board. You probably are lucky enough to now have one in your gym, and you can test this for yourself. Go to a climb where it's on 15 degrees, you have a set of holds, and you try that climb, maybe it feels like V2, and then you kick it back to 35. You're going to see such a drastic change in intensity just based on angle, and nothing else changes. And I really love using an adjustable training board to learn movement for a specific project. Let's say, it's at 40 degrees and I'm trying this problem. I kick it back maybe up to 30 and try that move in isolation again, and hopefully remember what that move feels like at a less steep angle, and then continue to kick that training board down and try to remember what movement I need. But the thing that is changing is the amount of tension in your climbing, because the more overhanging the climb is, the more body tension that you're going to have. So that's a really great example. And I do encourage you to try an adjustable climb, see what it feels like at two different angles, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I also think that RPE and auto-regulation can be best learned in lifting. So if you don't really know what this means and what it feels like in your body, try it in your next lifting session and try to put some numbers to the weights that you're doing, to the sets, and how you feel after the session. And all of like those RPEs are going to be a little different, but it is you just tuning into your body, starting to understand what it is that your body can do and how much effort it can give for each exercise. So, in today's episode, what we'll cover is how to apply RPE into your climbing sessions, how to adjust intensity across different drills and energy systems, what RPE should feel like for different drills as well, such as limit bouldering or dynos. And then we'll go over what a week should feel like. All right, so what is RPE for climbing? In lifting, RPE is based on how many reps you have left in the tank and will be dictated by the muscles that you're using. So the feedback really comes from the muscle telling you a lot about how close to fatigue you are or whether you are fatigued. And in climbing, it's a lot more complex, a lot more nuanced, and effort is really influenced by a lot of different factors. I'm not saying that these factors aren't present in strength training, but I think it's a lot more obvious in climbing. So your grip and finger strength is going to give you a lot of feedback. So are your fingers failing? Are they opening up? And can they latch a hold after you have dynamically gone to a hold? So that's one way of understanding where your intensity is. Another one is grip endurance. It's like, how pumped are you? And for sport climbers, this is a really good skill to have, is understanding what level of pump you have in your forearms. And that's really going to dictate RPE. In the following scale, I will try to give you an idea of how much pump you should have. But some people will just think that I'm not pumped and now I'm very pumped. And there's almost no in between. And that might take a little bit of time, a little bit of training to get used to, but you do have different grades of pump. And understanding that in your body is going to be really important. Another area that influences effort is your mental capacity, whether you're able to focus for sustained efforts, whether you can engage in what you're doing, how well you're engaged in what you're doing, and how much fear you're experiencing, because fear will dictate how much you're gripping, how much tension you're bringing, how much adrenaline is in your body. Another area is going to be your explosive dynamic movement, how accurate you are with each move, how much intent you're putting into each move. So all of these things will influence how much effort you're putting in. RPE is also influenced by your technique. You might not know when your technique starts to fail, or maybe when it starts to change based on your fatigue. A lot of people will just kind of move no matter what. And whenever your technique changes, you become less efficient. And now you're putting a lot more force onto your fingers. And lastly, this one is kind of funny. I put this in because I see this in a lot of climbers, and it's not bad. This is your stoke level. So people who are very excited and who love climbing so much, this will affect your effort level. And oftentimes, especially if you're new to training and you just start out a new program, you bring 110% to your sessions, which is awesome. If their skin is burning, no problem. You're just going to keep pushing through. If your forearms are super pumped, hey, no problem. You're probably just going to keep pushing through. And again, this is really awesome and I do admire it, but it could potentially lead to burning out pretty quickly. And it also, like, this level of effort constantly will actually just have you kind of plateau in your skill level. So you want to be strategic in how you bring the stoke, and understanding your stoke is awesome. And just saying, hey, I did enough and I'm still very excited and I can go do something else, maybe some stretching, something else that can help you fuel that stoke and that can help you still with your climbing, but you're not burning out in your fingers and forearms and the rest of your body. Okay, so just a reminder as we kind of go through this is that there is a difference between how hard a move is compared to how you feel at the end of a session. And again, part 1 of the series does go over that a little bit more. But as I go through the scale, I'm going to try to give you an example of both. Okay. All right. So the RPE climbing scale, it's exactly the same, where it's from 1 to 10. But I'm going to try to give you the feel of what each number should feel like. Okay. So we're going to start it from 1 to 2, kind of a range, 1 to 2, which is your active recovery or very easy. So that's kind of the number that you put to things that feel like a warm up, like very easy warm up or a very easy cool down. It really does feel effortless. There's no pump in your forearm. I would say that this level of climbing doesn't really exist in the gym for most people because, one, you have to be a strong enough climber for V0s to feel effortless when you do it over and over and over again. Maybe on slab. Okay, that is one area you could probably just do all day and it feel like nothing. But generally, I would say that when people are trying to do recovery climbing or active recovery on the wall, the intensity is way too high because there really isn't enough climbing available in the gym to be at this level. You might be able to find climbs outdoors, however. There are definitely terrains that you could do all day long, especially for beginner climbers. But of course, you have to have the fitness for that. So 1 to 2 feels effortless, very easy, and this is a great way to do active recovery. All right, so from 3 to 4, RPE 3 to 4, this is easy effort, where you could do a lot of easy boulder problems, like density bouldering, often includes arcing. This is really a great RPE to be in if you're learning a new skill. So this is something brand new to you. You've never done it, and you kind of take away the complexity of the climbing and just focus on the movement. The pump level will be no pump to low pump. And the end of the session, this often makes you feel a little better than when you started. So you're going to feel energized. And this is also a really great effort level for active recovery. All right, RPE 5 to 7. So now we're getting into the moderate effort category. This is where you start to refine skill. So skills that you've already developed, you can work on them in this moderate effort level and start to refine them. Movement starts to feel challenging here. If you're doing longer duration climbs, you'll experience a low to moderate pump. This is a good intensity to actually build your power endurance. So you'll be choosing climbs at this RPE level so that you can build your power endurance. And at the end of your session, your skin might hurt a little bit. You feel like you did something in your session and you performed really well. You tried hard. You might have failed on some climbs, but you finished the session feeling energized and snappy. And I would say that this zone, and actually specifically RPE 6 or below, is what we're trying to hit for most of our sessions. So you should feel snappy, energized, that you have something left in the tank by the end of your session. Okay, so RPE 8. Now this is where things are going to feel hard, but sustainable and repeatable. Training at this intensity usually builds strength for single efforts or for harder boulder problems. With multiple efforts or sustained climbing, you're probably going to have a moderate to high pump. You'll start to feel tired, but you can complete multiple sets. But by the end of the session, most likely your skin is burning. You might feel fatigued in your body, maybe specifically your elbows and your shoulders. You could maybe take a nap after you do this session. Maybe your joints hurt a little bit and you feel powered down. RPE 9. So this is very hard effort. The climbing is going to be near limit where you can really only do 1 or 2 moves at a time. This is actually a really great place to, or good zone to work for max strength, where it's a single effort and you're trying super hard. Or if you're doing explosive work, and explosive work really does have its own RPE scale. But when you're putting your full explosive intent into a move, it'll feel very snappy, very powerful, and you can give it kind of an RPE 8 or 9. For sustained efforts, you're going to be very pumped. All right. You're going to be very close to failing. You likely have experienced some sort of desperate, cruxy move at the end of a climb or maybe mid climb. And by the end of the session, I like to say that people have noodle arms. Maybe your finger joints hurt. Your skin is maybe close to bleeding. You have really nothing left in the tank. You might need an IV and a coffee. Usually, if you're an athlete who has experienced like high intensity training, this is maybe the stage that you start to puke. Okay, so that's RPE 9. And the last one, which is RPE 10, this is pure max effort. You probably have failed. You're failed. Okay, you can't hold on any longer. You know that you're going to fail, but you attempt anyway. And this is good. This is good for training like super max effort moves in bouldering or even on projects. But for sustained efforts, your forearms probably are jelly. Like you probably can't even open up your hand anymore. And at the end of the session, if you're giving an RPE 10, something has gone terribly wrong. Okay. So one thing just to highlight is that, again, the end of session is going to feel a little different to your isolated efforts. And so let's say that you're a V4 climber and you've been able to climb a couple of V5s and you do one V2 that feels engaging but easy. So that single effort might have been an RPE 4. But now you use this climb as part of a climbing drill. So let's say it's every minute on the minute for 6 minutes, you do this V2. So by the end of that 6 minutes, that same climb might feel like an RPE 8 or 9. So that's how you can take very low intensity climbs, but make them feel high intensity. And this is how you can kind of train those energy systems as well. So I want to give you kind of an idea of these energy systems or these drills and what RPE you could give to those systems. So before I go any further, though, I just want to say, like, the RPE recommendation that I give for any end of session is really 6 or below. So I know I'm repeating myself here, but it's because it's so important. I think a lot of people, especially in Western culture, we believe that training to a very high effort by the end of your session, that you should feel very tired. It's rewarding. Maybe it feels rewarding because we left everything out there and we tried super hard. And we've tried so much that we are so tired by the end of the session. And this is basically like suffer culture, that if you're not getting to that point, that you have not tried hard enough. And that's just simply not true. You know, you're really making it much more difficult for yourself to recover for your next session if you're leaving your sessions feeling like an RPE 7, 8, or 9, or 10. Okay. I think where sustainability comes in, even if you're a competitive climber, RPE 6, like 4 to 6, is going to be awesome for most of your sessions. Sometimes you can leave your sessions feeling more like a 7 or an 8. But that's when you get into some really good program design. So for most of you who are listening, please, think about this at the end of your sessions. Try to give yourself a number. And the feeling that I like to tell people at the end of your session is that you should feel snappy, and that maybe you have about 30 minutes left of climbing. Like if you stop and you're like, yeah, I could probably climb for another 30 minutes, then it's a good time to stop and do something else that's going to help you recover, such as going to the sauna or doing some flexibility training, something like that. And you're going to be able to recover so much better and feel really good for your next session. Okay. So let's start with the kind of the endurance climbing aspect. And so the goal here is really just to build some base endurance and efficiency for long sessions. Generally, the RPE is going to be at about 3 to 5 for the movement, and that you're able to do it over and over again. Mentally, you feel comfortable. You have maybe a light pump, and you're able to breathe through your nose. Okay. It's kind of like long, slow distance training if you're a runner. All right, this is the zone that we want to be in. Hardly any stress. You're just able to keep moving. There is some engagement in your brain that you're thinking about your technique, and you're breathing with ease. So some climbing drills are arcing, which is low intensity climbing for 20 plus minutes. For boulders, you could also do this for 5+ minutes. For most of us, building this endurance is going to be great. It's a wonderful foundation for just being able to do sustained longer efforts outside. Another drill is one of my favorites, which is density bouldering or density climbing. This is where you complete as many easy to moderate boulders in a certain time frame. And again, you are not going to be super pumped. This is very low pump. You're still engaged. But if you are getting too pumped, then you need to reduce the difficulty or take longer rests between each attempt. If the session feels too easy by the end of the set, then you can take note of that and try to change up the climbs in the next session. Let's talk about RPE for strength climbing training. So this would be hard bouldering, limit bouldering, or projecting. The goal here would be to build strength. And this is for hard moves or small holds. Generally, the RPE is going to be between 7 and 9. All right, like very close to near max effort. The moves might feel doable, but they're very challenging. Maybe you feel shaky. Maybe you're holding your breath and you're fully focused. Some drills would be hard bouldering, where you do one climb at a time, but the end of that climb, you are almost failing. And that felt very, very challenging. Limit bouldering, which is basically just short, like max difficulty moves. Generally, you can do one move or up to 6 moves. And that's how you know you're still training that max effort strength. Or you could be projecting. So this is working out a few moves at a time. You give yourself plenty of rest between each attempt. And the goal is really to make those moves as efficient as possible, or link moves up to the next section. Again, these are just a couple moves in a row, and you're trying to be as efficient as possible for each attempt. If you start to fail on these moves that you were previously successful on, it's actually time to stop that limit climb or that project. This is one thing I see over and over again, is that people are being very successful for about 30 minutes on a climb, and then all of a sudden they're not making that move again, but they keep trying because they're like, oh, I could do that move. I just got to keep trying. That at that point, your body is telling you you are fatigued. You're too fatigued to continue that move. You probably need to move on to a different type of move. Maybe you have the energy, but maybe there's a neurological fatigue factor there as well. So think about that next time you're projecting. Try not to bang your head up against the wall and get down on yourself that you couldn't do this move anymore. It's literally your body telling you you just can't anymore. So just move on. And oftentimes, if this is happening, you really need to take a lot more breaks in between, or longer breaks. So anywhere between 3 minutes. 3 minutes, I think, is a little too short for this max effort attempts. maybe more like 5 to 10 minutes between these hard efforts. Okay, so let's talk about RPE for explosive power. So things like dynos, dynamic movement, campusing. The goal here is to train your fast twitch muscle fibers. And when you're training fast twitch muscle fibers, the movement needs to be fast enough in order to recruit those. So the RPE is actually going to be much lower, like a 4 to 6, when you're doing single effort movements. Okay, so it should be very explosive. Your intention, though, how much you're focusing is going to be kind of on the higher end, like your concentration level. All right. Things like dynos, dynamic movement drills, campusing, or explosive pull-ups, things like that. The way to adjust what you're doing based on your fatigue or your level of fatigue is if you notice that your velocity drops. So if you're going much slower or you're not able to hit the same height, then you need to either make the move a little easier or just stop that set. And what's a little different with power training is that you really can't do a ton of repetition. One, because it is quite fatiguing on the nervous system. And it is very explosive. So that means you're really recruiting a lot of muscle when you're doing these moves. So the energy that you need for it is going to deplete pretty quickly. So it's better to not just keep doing these over and over and over again. When it comes to power training and explosive training, we're going to go for much lower volume generally. And the feeling that you want is crisp and explosive for dynamic moves. All right, so the last drill or energy system is power endurance. And really the goal here is to have sustained high intensity efforts over multiple boulders or a very steep overhanging rope climb. The RPE is like by the end of that set is generally going to be about a 7 or 8. The climbs should feel hard but repeatable. And a lot of the drills that you'll probably know this, like the 4x4s where you do a moderate climb, you rest very minimally, and then you repeat it 4 times, and then you do that on 3 more climbs for a total of 4x4. Basically, any climb that you can do in a sustained way and get kind of pumped, that's basically the power endurance zone. And just to reiterate here that the boulders or the climbs are going to be much lower than your max effort boulders. So they're moderate climbs that you're repeating over and over. And this is why I don't love training power endurance in this way, because the climbs that you're doing just aren't hard enough to really get you better at climbing. And the results that you get from power endurance are very short-lived. So if you are someone who loves 4x4s, maybe you've seen some good progress from it, which is great, probably because you're doing more volume. But you don't need that level of pump to get the same results as just climbing high volume with more rest in between. Anyway, I don't love this zone. But if you do it, just make sure that you're able to, that you develop a pump that isn't going to hinder you for the next set. Some people will get too pumped, especially if you're doing this on a sport climb, that you just can't get on the next climb again, because even if you've rested for 10 minutes or longer, because you're just so fatigued. So you really do have to manage your pump when you're doing drills like this. All right, so let's talk about RPE in a week. Now, to reiterate, you don't want to be doing RPE 7, 8, or 9 consecutively in the same week. Ideally, you're mixing things up. One strategy of training is called high-low training, where one day is going to feel really hard and another day is going to feel really easy. I really prefer to do sessions that are mostly in the 4 to 6 RPE, and I change up the exercises in those sessions. But either way, just think about how much effort you're bringing to your sessions and how often you're doing that. in the week. And there really is, I think it's really tough to know if you're trying hard enough. I think people who might not see a lot of change in their training, you might not be trying hard enough in the single efforts, and you might not be bringing your full focus to those sessions. Um, yeah, and even possibly by the end of the session, if it feels like, oh, I didn't really do anything, yeah, you might not have really tried hard enough in your sessions. So if you're someone who has been climbing for a while and just hasn't seen a lot of change in your climbing, this could be the reason why. Now, the other side of this is if you haven't seen any changes in your climbing and you have been trying really hard and you've been really, really tired, you're probably not giving yourself enough rest in between your sessions to really allow your body to adapt to the training that you're doing. Your body really, it adapts to stress, and it does this really, really well, but you have to give it time to recover. And that's really the only way it's going to change. So keep those things in mind. Yeah. And so when it comes to a weekly plan, I really like at least a day of where I'm trying really hard. I do limit bouldering for my clients. This is always like a fun limit day where you can do whatever you want and try as hard as you can on those days. And then on the other days, you could do one endurance day where you're focusing on technique and a lot of mileage, and you feel really good by the end of the session. And then there's kind of this moderate intensity day where you are doing maybe moderate to hard climbs, but you give yourself a lot of time in between those attempts. You're trying to figure out sequencing and beta. So every attempt feels like you're fresh, like you're ready to go. And that will just refine your skill and technique. What is not going to refine your skill and your technique is being tired when you step onto the climb. And if you're also forgetting your beta, and if you're not remembering the sequence, all of those things are going to get in the way of you getting better with your technique. Give yourself a lot of time between those climbs. And in that time, you can sequence the climb, you can look at video and see where you went wrong in the last attempt. All of these things can just help you strategize and get better and feel good for that next attempt. Okay, the last thing I'll leave you with, which is, again, like your body is changing daily. And how do you adjust what you're doing based on how you feel? And the first place to do that is to figure out where are you at that day and tune into your body and your warm-up. That's the best place. You might leave work feeling really sluggish. You do feel that way, have a snack, see how that changes your body. Even just a snack might help you kind of kick that sluggishness to the side. But once you start warming up and that blood flow kind of just helps you get out of that funk, you might feel excellent for that session. But if it's not changing, if things feel pretty draggy, you feel heavy, then it's time to switch it up. If you were planning a hard limit session, maybe you do something a little easier that day. And this gives you some mental flexibility, because the worst thing is feeling terrible in your body and you're trying really hard, and now you can't do all of the climbs that you did last week. There's nothing more demoralizing than that. And it kind of just like decreases your motivation and maybe love for climbing. And, the goal is to have fun and to love this sport for as long as possible. So if there's any moment when you're just, you're not feeling it, it's okay to try something different. Go into a different terrain, try your anti-style, something easy. And just keep moving. Okay. All right, so that is it for today. In our next session, we're going to be talking about hangboarding and how to apply RPE to hangboarding. So I hope this helps you. Please, in your sessions, try this. Give yourself an RPE rating. Start getting to know your body and how it shows up for sessions, how it feels after sessions, how much effort you're putting into every single move. And that's just going to give you a much better picture on how to move forward with your own training. All right, we'll catch you in the next one.